In the deepest, darkest corners of the ocean, far beyond where any ordinary creature dared to swim, there existed a parallel Bikini Bottom. It was a shadowy, twisted version of the cheerful, bustling town we know. Here, the sea was murky and black, the coral was withered and jagged, and the buildings were crumbling, barely standing in the toxic waters. The jellyfish didn't glide gracefully. They darted aggressively, their stingers dripping with venom. Bubbles didn't gently rise to the surface. They twisted and writhed, popping with sharp, eerie screams. In this corrupted underworld lived the inhabitants of a world gone wrong. And among them was evil Spongebob. He was everything the real Spongebob was not. Where the good Spongebob had bright, sunny yellow skin, evil Spongebob was a sickly, green-tinged yellow, as if mold was slowly eating away at him. His eyes were large and hollow, soulless pits that seemed to swallow light. His teeth, once gleaming white, were now jagged and rotten, sharp enough to tear through anything in their path. His laugh, once a cheerful giggle, had become a raspy, sinister cackle that echoed through the dark streets of the parallel Bikini Bottom. This version of Spongebob had never known kindness or joy. He didn't work at the Krusty Krab because he loved it. He worked there because he hated it. The greasy patties, the oil-slick floors, the constant yelling of Mr. Krabs drove him to madness. But he stayed because he thrived on the chaos. He didn't have friends. He had enemies. Patrick wasn't his best friend. He was a dangerous rival, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his moment to strike. Squidward wasn't annoyed by him. He feared him, avoiding eye contact whenever evil Spongebob passed by. Sandy, in this world, was a cold, calculating scientist, always experimenting on others, and Plankton had long since given up on his dreams, having been driven insane by his countless failures. But evil Spongebob wasn't satisfied with this world. No, deep in his twisted mind, he knew there was another Bikini Bottom, a bright, happy place where a better version of him existed. And in that place, the real Spongebob lived a life of joy and laughter. Evil Spongebob seethed with jealousy. He wanted to take it all away, to become the real Spongebob and destroy everything that made his good counterpart happy. For years, he watched, searching for a way to cross over into the other world. He tried everything, dark rituals, strange experiments, and powerful spells, all to no avail. But one stormy night, the ocean itself seemed to bend to his will. A rift tore open in the sky above the barren jellyfish fields, a swirling vortex of shadow and light, crackling with energy. This was his chance. Without hesitation, evil Spongebob leaped through the rift, disappearing into the portal with a wicked grin plastered across his grotesque face. Back in the real Bikini Bottom, everything seemed normal. The sun was shining, the jellyfish were buzzing, and Spongebob was as cheerful as ever. He had just finished another satisfying day at the Krusty Krab, flipping Krabby Patties and sharing laughs with his friends. As he skipped home, he couldn't help but feel like something was a little off. There was a strange chill in the air, like an invisible presence was watching him, waiting. That night, Spongebob had a terrible nightmare. In his dream, he was standing alone in his pineapple house, but something wasn't right. The furniture was twisted and warped, the walls seemed to breathe, and his reflection in the mirror was wrong. The Spongebob staring back at him had hollow eyes, sharp teeth, and a grin that stretched unnaturally wide across his face. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The reflection moved on its own, stepping out of the mirror, reaching for him with long, clawed fingers. Spongebob woke up with a start, drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. It was just a dream, he told himself. But the uneasy feeling lingered, like a dark cloud hanging over him. The next day, strange things started happening. His friends, Patrick, Squidward, and Sandy, began to notice subtle differences. Spongebob's laugh wasn't the same. It was a little too harsh, too sharp. His smile seemed forced, and his usually bright eyes appeared dull, almost empty at times. He would stare into space for long periods, muttering to himself in a voice that didn't quite sound like his own. At first, they brushed it off. Maybe he was just having an off day. But as the days passed, things only got stranger. At the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob's behavior became erratic. He started flipping patties with an intensity that made even Mr. Krabs nervous. The customers complained that the Krabby Patties tasted different. Too salty, too greasy. Squidward, who normally ignored everything around him, couldn't help but notice how SpongeBob would occasionally glance at him with an unsettling look in his eyes, as if sizing him up. Even Patrick, who wasn't the sharpest starfish, felt uneasy around his best friend. Something was definitely wrong, but no one dared confront SpongeBob about it. They wanted to believe it was just their imagination. SpongeBob himself was confused. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. He would hear whispers in his house, and when he looked in the mirror, sometimes he would see that horrible reflection again, the version of himself with sharp teeth and hollow eyes, grinning back at him. Objects in his house moved when he wasn't looking, and sometimes at night he could swear he saw someone standing in the corner of his room, watching him as he slept. Then one night, the nightmare became reality. SpongeBob was closing up the Krusty Krab after a long day. The lights were dim, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. As he swept the floor, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He froze, slowly turning around. There, standing in the shadows of the kitchen, was himself. But it wasn't him. It was evil SpongeBob, grinning with his yellow, rotten teeth, his hollow eyes glowing in the dark. His voice was like nails scraping across a chalkboard. "I've been waiting for this moment, SpongeBob," he hissed. SpongeBob backed away, his heart racing. Who are you?" "I'm you, but better," evil SpongeBob snarled. His laugh was cruel and twisted, sending shivers down SpongeBob's spine. "You're not me!" SpongeBob shouted, his voice trembling with fear. "I would never hurt anyone!" Evil SpongeBob's grin widened. "Oh, but I will. I'm going to take your place, and no one will ever know. I'll destroy everything you love, and they'll think it's you." Before SpongeBob could react, his evil clone lunged at him, teeth bared. The two SpongeBobs clashed in a brutal, chaotic battle. SpongeBob fought with all his strength, but evil SpongeBob was faster, stronger, and far more ruthless. His sharp teeth tore through SpongeBob's porous skin, his jagged nails cutting deep into his flesh. SpongeBob cried out in pain, desperately trying to escape, but evil SpongeBob wouldn't let go. In a final, horrific moment, evil SpongeBob grabbed SpongeBob by the throat and squeezed, his eyes glowing with pure malice. "Say goodbye, SpongeBob," he whispered, tightening his grip. With a final choked gasp, the real SpongeBob was gone. The next morning, Bikini Bottom went on like nothing had happened. The sun rose, the jellyfish buzzed, and the Krusty Krab opened for business. No one knew that the real SpongeBob was gone, that an imposter had taken his place. Evil SpongeBob slipped into the real SpongeBob's life effortlessly, mimicking his cheerful personality, his laugh, and his daily routine. But there were signs, small, subtle signs, that something was wrong. His laugh was too harsh, too forced. His smile was too wide, too unnatural. His eyes, once full of life, were now cold and dead. The Krabby Patties still tasted off, but no one could figure out why. Patrick noticed that his best friend didn't seem quite right, but he brushed it off, convincing himself that SpongeBob was just tired. Squidward, who had always hated SpongeBob's cheerful attitude, didn't care. He was just happy that SpongeBob seemed quieter, less annoying. Mr. Krabs was too focused on his profits to pay attention to the growing unease in the Krusty Krab. But Sandy, always the sharp one, couldn't ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Sandy began to watch SpongeBob closely. His movements were different. His voice had a strange edge to it, and sometimes, when she caught him alone, she could see a glint of malice in his eyes. She knew deep down that the Spongebob she knew was gone. But by the time she realized the truth, it was too late. Evil Spongebob had already taken over, and the real Spongebob was never coming back. As the days turned into weeks, Bikini Bottom slowly began to change. The bright, happy town started to grow darker, more twisted, reflecting the evil that now lived within it. And no one knew, no one but Sandy. But by then there was nothing she could do. Evil Spongebob had won, and the world would never be the same.